How are you? Welcome back to Telling Tall Tales the Right Way. I am your host, Heather Asianbi. I am a best-selling editor, which means I've edited books that have gone on to become bestsellers. I am a certified storyteller. I am also a journalist, a content marketer, and a PR professional. So I know my way around stories. I've basically been telling stories on digital platforms specifically for like 30 years. I know, crazy, right? But true. So today we are going to talk about one of, it was a New York Times bestseller. It was on Oprah's list. But what I don't think a lot of people take into account with it when they're talking about the book is the language of the book. And so we're going to kind of focus on that today, but I also want to run through how it checks all the boxes for all the elements of every great story. So what are the elements of every great story? We haven't really talked about them specifically in a while. So number one, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? Seems kind of obvious, but when we're talking about storytelling in particular, that's how you take your readers or viewers on a journey, right? So get them in there, and the person they are at the beginning of the book or the beginning of your series or the beginning of the movie is not the person who at the end of the story, right? How they feel about it, what they think, what you want them to do, right? Whatever that is. You need a conflict and a resolution, which is basically a fancy way of saying you need a problem and a solution. That seems like kind of a no-brainer, right? Of course there's a problem and a solution. Because every movie has one of those action films, which we'll get into a little bit later, specifically have like a big conflict, which is like, we got to stop the big bad dude or person. It's usually a guy though. Have you ever noticed that? Anyway, stop the bad person from either doing something or continuing to do something, right? So, and then the payoff is they stopped them. You also need to answer the 5 W's and an H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. I'm going to dig into each of those as it relates to this book. You also need to have consistency and congruency. So what does that mean? That means whatever the rules are for the world in which the story takes place, that the characters act and speak accordingly, that the technology is appropriate for that world. Even fantasy, right? Like Star Wars. Let's use Star Wars as an example. Very specific set of rules govern this world, and the technology matches it. So kind of think of it in terms like that. And then congruency. Congruency is making sure that in a book, especially, let's just say, I think it was which one was it? It wasn't Madame Bovary. Might have been. I don't remember. I read it in college. Anyway, but someone dies, like at not really the beginning of the story, but beginning enough. And then they're alive, like later in the book, like, what? So, and I know that's an extreme example, but here we are. Okay, so what's the book that we're going to talk about? The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Okay. This is a book that does take place in the antebellum South. There are descriptions of the brutality and complete and total lack of humanity that was directed to Black Americans. However, this book transcends. I read something the other day about I don't remember the term, but it was just about how the trauma of depicting, like, there was already trauma in enslavement, and now books and movies that portray that trauma just increase trauma. So I just want to make it plain that this book, while there are some of those descriptions, does not stay there for long because it is focused so much on something else. Okay, so let's talk about it. The Water Dancer. This book, I read this book when we were locked down in the pandemic. Now, unlike a lot of folks who were like, I'm making sourdough bread or I'm finding my art or whatever, like I still had a job, right? Like I had a job. So I was like working during the day. I was like, where do people find all this time? Anyway, I am a voracious reader. See that book, that bookshelf right there? I've read, I think there might only be 3 books on that bookshelf I haven't read yet. And it's because they're nonfiction and they're kind of heavier topics. So I got to be in the right headspace. Anyway, this is a novel, work of fiction. So let's go through the plot points, or let's go through the points. Does it have a clear beginning, middle, and end? Absolutely it does. Is there a primary conflict and a resolution? Yes. The conflict, however, is multifaceted. And the resolution is also, I don't want to say multifaceted, but it got more, it has more than one resolution. I'll just say that. The ending of this book is not like we meet the characters and then whoever dies at the end or whatever. There is death in this book. But the way I like this ending is because Hiram, he is the primary character. It ends, they've accomplished something that they set out to accomplish. We'll get into that in a minute. And then the book ends, but we know that Hiram's life doesn't end. Like his life goes on. And because of everything that has transpired before, like we're so hopeful. Like we're so hopeful for him and his family. Okay, so let's get into it. Who are the who's? So Hiram, as I mentioned, he is the primary character. When we meet Hiram, he is enslaved in Virginia. He is taking a carriage over a bridge that he has never, ever, ever, ever wanted to be on before. He just doesn't have a choice right now. The reason he doesn't want to be on that bridge is because he knows that when his mother was sold away from him, when he was a very young child, she was taken across that bridge and taken further south. So like Mississippi, Louisiana, like deep south, right? Her being stolen from him is what has triggered his lack of memory. It's repressed memories, right? It's too painful for him to remember his mother. So it's almost like his life began when he was a little kid and not a baby, right? Because he doesn't want to remember his mother. It's too painful. All right, so what is the primary plot of the story? Okay, that's hard to describe in a very couple of sentences, but this is what I will say. Hiram discovers he has a supernatural ability that is, and water is the conduit. Now, having said he has a supernatural ability, please do not mistake this book for fantasy. Although, obviously, I would have loved for this to be a real thing that, could use water. Okay, anyway, it is not fantasy. This book is grounded in the harsh and horrible reality of U.S. history during this time period. That is the supernatural element. And how it is applied is also treated with depth and gravity. It is not frivolous. Okay, so where does this take place? Virginia is where it starts. Hiram is enslaved in Virginia. And then we jump to a couple of different locations. But in any case, it is almost entirely on that like mid-Atlantic eastern seaboard area. Okay. So we did who, we did what, we did where. Okay. Why does this plot kick off? Okay. Hiram is on his way across the bridge. He's on a carriage. He's driving horses, and it's raining. And wagon wheels were made of wood. Bridges were also made of wood. Slippery can happen, right? It's raining. It's a storm. Hiram loses control of the carriage. The carriage goes over the side of the bridge and into the water. He thinks he's going to drown. He thinks he's going to die. And why wouldn't you when you go into the water and a carriage is coming down on top of you? And then suddenly he is on the riverbank. And the way it's written, we are just as much in the dark as here. It's like, what just happened? Like, did somebody, he tries to rationalize it, right? Like somebody must have come along and dragged him out of the water, put him on the riverbank, and then left for whatever reason. Okay. That's how this all kind of gets started. And then he has a couple of other incidents that involve water. Okay. So when does this take place? I'm not exactly sure the year of it. I don't actually know what year it is, but let's just say it's before the Civil War. Okay. So anywhere in the like mid to young 1800s, let's just say that. And then how do all these points get pulled together? How does the conflict get resolved? Well, first of all, I guess we need to define the conflict first. So there's a couple of them. Obviously, the overarching evil of slavery and what that did to millions of people, and what it has obviously done as that generational trauma has come through, as well as the racism that is systemic. Okay, that's a political discussion. We are not going political. Okay. Anyway, how it gets pulled together is kind of, it's actually quite linear. The story is quite linear. We don't really jump back and forth in time a lot. We don't like skip around from place to place. Like we just like where Hiram is where we are, right? So anyway, consistency. This book is so consistent. There is not a detail that has gone unrecognized. Everything in this book, the people, the places, what they wear, what they do, what they say, how they feel, has been so well thought out, and every character is so well drawn. I mean, everybody has a very unique personality. They have they have like their own I guess like life trajectory, like life journey. They have their own motivations. They have their own wants and needs and fears and hopes, right? Like everybody has that. Okay, so Hiram Walker, protagonist, he is he's who the story revolves around. And then we have Thena is, I'm going to assume that's how you pronounce it. When Hiram's mother is sold away from him, she becomes like his mother figure. Sophia becomes his like romantic interest, sort of. And well, no, I mean, she lives on another plantation. Howell Walker is Hiram's father, and to the surprise of probably absolutely no one, he is the plantation owner. So Hiram is basically the result of rape, but he tries to have a better relationship with Hiram than just like enslaver and enslaved. It doesn't always go great, as I'm sure you can say. So Corinne is the white woman who, now I was a little conflicted about her involvement in the story, because I just thought, do we need a white savior here? Like, do we need a white savior? But if you think about the historical context of the time, we kind of do. And the reason why is because she can get into spaces and do things that even free Black Americans couldn't do, like own property, for one, right? So anyway, so she lives in the South, and she is a fierce abolitionist. And so it's her and then this other group, they get word of Hiram's ability to use water to travel. So what is revealed is that Hiram's supernatural ability is carried through water. And what does that mean? That means when he was drowning in the river, he didn't want to die. And so he was like, I need to get out of here. And because he was in water, he got out of there. But it happens like suddenly, right? It's not like he is floated up out of the water, and like, that's not how it works. He thinks about these things, he visualizes it, like he and then it happens. Okay. So the conflict, the overarching conflict of enslavement never leaves the book, because we know, well, we all know American history, right? But the immediate conflict is that Hiram is not altogether sure if he really wants to be part of this Underground Railroad movement. It takes some convincing to get him to be part of it. And they also put him through like this kind of boot campish experience, which does remind me of an action film. So this is why I brought up action movies earlier. So this book could be an action movie. It totally could be, but it doesn't read like one. And the reason why it doesn't, and the reason why it has stuck with me for these years, is because the author, Ta-Nehisi Coates, has such a firm and intimate relationship with language that his word choices and phrasing are, they're exquisite. Honestly, they are exquisite. And it turns out, so this is major spoiler. Turns out, Hiram is not the only one with this ability. The reason why Harriet Tubman was able to get so many people out of take them from enslavement to freedom, because she also had that ability. Right? It's like a little plot twist, but it doesn't feel, I mean, you know who she is when she's introduced because of how they refer to her. But you don't feel like you're like, oh, that's a cheap shot, right? Like, it doesn't feel like that. It feels very organic. It feels very well thought out. And we all know, well, if you don't, I'm going to tell you, water is a very powerful element that appears in cultures around the world. And so when people in African villages were forcibly taken from their homes, they brought culture with them, and that includes their particular belief or practice around water. Also, in the book, water represents both like like the fluidity of memory, right? Hiram does start to remember his mom and realizes he wants to go get her. Corinne, because she's white and she can do these things, finds out where she is. Problem is that distance-wise, that's a really long way to go from, like, let's just say New York into the deep South via water to get someone and bring them back. Like they've typically been sticking with that like mid-Atlantic seaboard area, right? Because it's close to the northern states, easier to get to freedom. Plus, Harriet was rescuing her family. Hiram was trying to get his family out. I'm sure you can guess he was successful, right? Okay, anyway. But what is extraordinary about this book is the language, okay? So first of all, I also would like to dispel the myth that your first sentence has to be like a boom, right? Like, I woke up with blood on my hands, right? That's attention getting, but I mean, obviously I'm making this up and that wasn't very good, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like your first sentence, we've always been told that if you're going to write a book, your first sentence has to be like, ba-bam. But in this book, I'd just like to point out, this first sentence is a whole paragraph and it is beautiful. Okay. So this is why Hiram doesn't want to be on the bridge. And I could only have seen her there on the stone bridge, a dancer wreathed in ghostly blue, because that was the way they would have taken her back when I was young, back when the Virginia earth was still red as brick and red with life. And though there were other bridges spanning the River Goose, they would have bound her and brought her across this one, because this was the bridge that fed into the turnpike, that twisted its way through the green hills and down the valley before bending in one direction, and that direction was south. So when you open a book with a passage as gorgeously descriptive as this, I mean, so this is why this book has stuck with me. But there's some other things too, right? So because water is so closely tied to everything, Hiram says in the book, in the water, all the weight of the plantation, all the weight of the task. Okay, so in the book, task is the work of the enslaved, and it is always capitalized. And then quality, also always capitalized, refers to white people. That's just how it's done in the book. So let's go back. In the water, all the weight of the plantation, all the weight of the task, all the weight of the world washed off my back. Ain't that something? A slave feeling weightless. I mean, come on. And then you have this passage on the back of the book that says, I am here telling this story, and not from the grave, not yet, but from the here and now, peering back into another time when we were tasked and close to the earth and close to a power that baffled the scholars and flummoxed the quality. A power like our music, like our dance, that they cannot grasp because they cannot remember. So I'm going to leave it there. But I want you, if you have not read this book yet, you need to read it. It's amazing. If you have read it, I'd really love to know, like, what resonates the most with you. What part of Hiram's journey sticks with you the most? Let me know. Put in the comments. So we have 2 more episodes in season 1, and then season 2 will be up. I'm not really sure the timing of that. But if you have any ideas that you'd like me to cover in season 2, any TV shows or books made into movies, like, let me know, because I definitely want us to talk these things out. Okay. So next episode, we are going to talk about another book that has stuck with me because, I mean, different reasons, right? Like totally different reasons, but just really good. Okay. Anyway, it's Mexican Gothic, and that author is Silvia Moreno Garcia. So take care. Have a great evening, afternoon, morning, whenever you catch this, if you're not watching it when it airs. And I will see you soon.